Okay, morning folks. Welcome to the Global Power Platform Bootcamp UK edition. Firstly, apologies for running this on a working day. I know everybody also has work to go to, and hopefully you've maybe got us on in the background as well as getting some work done. The Global Power Platform Bootcamp is the February 18th and 19th, and unfortunately, I happen to be moving house this weekend. So Friday it is. So all of these sessions will be available on YouTube, but just look at who's managed to show up despite the fact that we're recording this on a Friday. Look at the faces that we've got here and the presenters. So thank you so much to everybody for taking part and really jumping in and helping the community out to put on the only UK Global Power Platform Bootcamp event. So without further ado, let's just move on and I'll introduce you to me. So I'm your host today. So in case we haven't met, that's a crying shame and we should get on and do that. So reach out to me on all of these social things. So I'm Sharon Sumner. So I'm one of the leads of the Cambridge Power Platform user group, and one of our first speakers is also one of the new leads of the Cambridge Power Platform group as well. I'll introduce you to him in a moment. So I'll be around all day. So in the background of all of these sessions, I'll be here, I'll answer questions, I'll interrupt the speakers because that's what I do. So that we make sure that everybody is getting their voice heard through the chat, and make sure that the presenters are getting some good feedback as and when it happens if they're busy presenting and not necessarily looking at the screen. So I'll be your moderator. If we can keep the questions in chat, that really helps. And throughout the day, as I say, please let's have some chat going on that chat channel, and keep the thing light and airy and moving along. So obviously today what we're going to do is we're going to be recording all of the speakers so that we can put that live on YouTube. There will be events going on around the world, so expect to see lots of YouTube videos coming out over the coming few days, and we'll be prepping those up next week or in the next week or two. We've got quite a lot of speakers to get through. Housekeeping, please be respectful in your comments or in your questions. If we permit you to come off mic, please be respectful to the speakers that have given up their time for the day. And that's all I'm going to say on that, because I think it's a given. We're a community and we work together. These guys that have spent their time to come and pass on their knowledge and help show you some cool stuff that they've done in these apps. So it's really important that we respect the speakers and also the guests. So thank you everybody for coming along. Here's our agenda for the day. So what are we looking at? First up, the amazing Sancho Harker, who we can all see up there, hopefully, at the top of the screen. He's ready to go first. Sancho is Microsoft MVP, as are most of the speakers today, and will be sharing with us some of the stuff he's been doing on the amazing theming tools in Powerapps. Really worth seeing this session. I think this is probably the first session since version 3, so we're super lucky to have Sancho kicking off the day. We've got a session with Shane Young. This is a pre-recorded slot that he's done for us that we'll play for you at 10:30. We're going to move on to Serge and Isabel. Governance, really important topic. Sorry, skip forward. We've got Thomas, we've got Nick coming along from Microsoft to share with us some Powerapps portals session. We've then got Daniel, Marcin, Elizabeth. I mean, the names just go on. We've got loads and loads of people throughout the day. So it's going to be a really packed day. As you can see, we've got very few breaks, but again, don't worry. If there's a session that you want to see, we'll have that recorded and we'll notify you once we've put all those up on YouTube. So keep a lookout on the CAMS PPUG channel on my YouTube. So thank you. All of the sessions will be on YouTube. So let's get started. Are you there, Daniel?
I am.
You are, fantastic. And we're going to talk about forms, which is a really great topic. I haven't seen this one done before, so I'm really looking forward to this one. I've seen you speak a number of times before and know of your marvelous expertise, but for everybody else on the screen, here's a bit of a potted history of Daniel and what he's up to. Yes, lots of Daniels today. A bit of information there, but I think it's always nice to introduce yourself, Daniel. So I'm just going to hand straight over to you and let you have the full time of the session. So have fun.
My webcam software is running an update right now, so hopefully my webcam doesn't just
We can see you and the beautiful purple behind you. Very Powerappsy. Very nice.
Thank you. Very Powerappsy. Let me just switch a few settings and get on my Teams screen. This one should work. And remind me again, I have what, 20 minutes, 30 minutes?
No, you have a full hour.
I have a full hour.
I know. A privilege. But we can always take an extra break because we've got a full day of sessions today. So if you run out of things to talk about, which never happens, then do let us know and we'll cut the session short. That's absolutely fine. Right, everybody, Daniel Christian.
Thank you. Well, my name is Daniel Christian, and I'm from the United States, but on the east coast of the United States. So it's 8:30 a.m. my time, and I'm just excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And well, I'll come more about the forms everywhere thing. I do have I'm active on social media, and I have a YouTube channel as well. So if you just go to YouTube and you search for Daniel Christian Powerapps MVP Power Automate, you'll find my my channel over there. And then that's my Twitter handle, and that's also my Instagram account. So feel free to connect with me on social media. So let's kind of dive in on today's concept of forms. We'll just jump straight in on that topic, and that's one of the things I planned for this year, is because we've already established that there's a lot of options available, both in different sections of M365. And so one of the questions I get asked a lot is, well, this scenario, which form do I use, or what do I use to build this type of solution? So I think for the last almost year and a half, I have been having talks with companies and at workshops and at events. And so I just thought, okay, now that I have enough content, I've also got real experiences and insight from the world. That's going to be one of my topics. So I'm excited about topping this. So as of today, these are the main apps or services or applications, whatever you go by, that we'll be talking about today. And I know some of it might be, well, Teams isn't a service for building forms. It's a collaboration tool. I get it, but it has the functionality to go ahead and build forms and go ahead and build data, have data stored over there as well. That's why if you can see in Powerapps and Power Automate, in Powerapps on the top right, Teams on the bottom left, I've put in the Dataverse icon over there as well, just to show that, hey, these are, the synergies between those two. So I'll call that out, and now we'll, spend a little bit more time on each of these things. Awesome. So, and by the way, this is just a conversation. So Sharon, if you see, a good question that comes up pertaining to the item that I'm talking to, feel free to, bring that in. And then I'll just make a quick decision if you've got time to answer that, or if I'm already going to answer that later. So,
absolutely,
feel free to do that. So, if for any of you who this is a kind of a new topic, or, you say, oh, I'm familiar with the two things, but I'm not familiar with the other one, just to make sure that everybody's, on the same page, we'll just do a quick recap of what all of these things are. So the form types available right now are, well, Microsoft Forms. Microsoft Forms is a absolute no-code solution whatsoever, and it comes along with your Microsoft 365 licenses, so you don't have to pay anything extra for it. And here's actually a screenshot of a form that I've been using. As you can see, it is both. It's by default responsive. That means that you can open that up on your desktop, you can open that up on your smartphone, you can open it on a tablet, and it just automatically works. It's nothing that you had to do from a formula-based or design-based. It just happens. So that's Microsoft Forms. Now we're going to talk about Powerapps. Now, Powerapps actually has a few flavors. Right off the bat, there's something called as Canvas apps. I'm a big fan of that. But there's also model-driven apps. In fact, I'll be showing you a demo on that. But I really like the fact that we just came off a session on portal apps, and this is an example of the portal apps. In fact, a really great example was just presented to you. So as far as the previous ones go, Canvas app is an absolute, I wouldn't say it's no code, it is low code. You can do it with no code, but low code kind of gives you that little bit of an extra wow factor into it. And it comes along with your Microsoft 365 services, or it can come from a Dynamics 365 side. And you can, as if you're using certain specific data sources, such as a SharePoint list, then your N365 licenses, well, it's already got you covered. You're good on that side. In fact, it allows you to use Exchange. It'll allow you to go ahead and use SharePoint Online, Azure Active Directory. You've got already a lot available directly with your existing M365 licenses. Now, model-driven apps is not considered more of a UI. Let me back up. It's not the type of apps form that you want to use if you want to build the whole design from scratch. However, model-driven apps is a really robust and heavy tool for large content type of situation. So you've got to kind of understand what the pros and cons are of that. I'll give major kudos that the model-driven apps has been giving you the functionality to tweak its design a little bit. And also you can take some of the Powerapps and you can embed that into model-driven apps. But just keep in mind that model-driven apps is very robust. It's a heavy powerful tool for large content to go in and just constantly churn that data on a very simple but a very powerful way of doing it. Now, portal apps, again, I won't spend too much time on that because we just got off a session on that. I always talk about, it is a portal app, but it's so much more than that. It's completely a web-based application, which gives you the functionality to also go ahead and take information in externally and put some really good security boundaries on that. My personal thing about portal apps, it is by default responsive. So you just go ahead and build the entire design and it's responsive, very similar to how Microsoft Forms was. So that's what really caught my interest. And in fact, I keep teasing the Microsoft product group. As an MVP, I have the pleasure of talking directly with them. I say, take those design ideas from portal apps and embed that into Powerapps because we need that. So that's just my 2 cents to them. All right, cool. Let's get going forward. Now let's talk about a different flavor of Powerapps directly from the SharePoint side. Now, SharePoint has 2 iterations of customized forms. Out of the box, SharePoint will go ahead and give you a form. So if you are thinking of using using SharePoint, SharePoint is a Microsoft 365 application. It's been around for over 10 years now. You've got the functionality to build a very cool, a very fast Excel-like spreadsheet called a list. Or a document library, and out of the box, it gives you this form type of experience. You can also go ahead and use Canvas apps for that. Now, the Canvas apps in SharePoint is called as a customized form, and it's a very lightweight version of Powerapps, specifically the Powerapps Studio. So I'll give you some examples of what this lightweight means. You are allowed to go ahead and build the form, publish it directly, and it always gets tied to that SharePoint list. But you can't do a save as to an app. You can't go ahead and flip a toggle switch and then immediately make that to an app yet. That's not available over there. So that's why I always use the term lightweight version of the Powerapps Studio. Now, since we are in this topic, I also want to talk a little bit about Microsoft Lists. Microsoft Lists, as you and I will already know, that it's a place to go and do a lot of fancy Excel, like it's all tables and everything. However, if you went ahead and built a form, a customized form in your SharePoint list, then when you open that up into your Microsoft Forms, then in your Microsoft list, the exact same form will open up over there as well. So the point I'm trying to make is that if you actually went and thought that I'm a big fan of Microsoft lists, people in my company or my clients like it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to still go to the backend SharePoint list. I'll build my customized forms over there, and I'll open up in my Microsoft list, and it just works. So that's why I wanted to briefly touch upon the Microsoft list, and I'll show you. I'm going to share some a new release that actually just came up on that as well. Just let's wait on that. So I gave you a good scenario of all the Microsoft forms. Now, what I want to talk about is the different type of scenarios where these forms are. Because instead of me just talking and explaining, it's best that I come up with some scenarios and some examples. And these are all the ones that we're going to cover. Concept of where I can do public facing. If it is internal, then the different options I want to talk about internal as a one-time only place where I can also do a view and edit, which means multiple times. And then the different iterations, like the design part of it, desktop and mobile device, and then finally volume and capacity. All right, so let's dive straight into it. Let's talk about the public facing one. Now, when it comes to public facing, basically I need anonymous access. And I personally, from a public standpoint, am a big fan of Microsoft Forms, and the one which is on the top right. So when it comes to the Microsoft Forms, you've got the functionality right off the bat to turn on the anonymous functionality over there. When that means that you go and take a look at your Microsoft Forms, you can say that, hey, I don't really care who's the one who's submitting information. I just want to know what is the data that is actually submitted over there. And it is also by default responsive. Now, when it comes to these data sources for Microsoft Forms, or it is there for the Powerapps portal, if you talk about both of them together, you've got these two options. Powerapps portal, which can be public facing, and we just saw that in the demo for the previous session, you got Dataverse, and you can put a row level security. You can put high security of people are just writing to it and not reading. You can do all of that at the Dataverse level. For Microsoft Forms, you basically don't have a list or data, but as you see data coming in, you've got the option to go ahead and export that to an Excel spreadsheet, because at the end of the day, that's what people like the most, is they want it as a spreadsheet. And right off the bat, that functionality is available. So what happens over here is that you, depending on which one you pick, you said Microsoft Forms. Well, if it's Microsoft Forms, it's free. Now, I say free, somehow you are paying for it. But free means that you've already got M365, your licenses for that. By default, you've got this functionality to use Microsoft Forms, hence the term free. Now, if you are going to use Powerapps portals, then you will have an additional license for that. And that's a whole separate topic, so we won't talk about that. I just want to call it out that if that's the direction you want to go for, just plan on purchasing some extra licenses for that. So that's kind of the important thing over here. This MSA preview was actually just released about a week and a half ago. In fact, I had on my YouTube channel, Reza and I do an R&D show. If you know Reza Durrani, we had two of the Microsoft people come and demonstrate that. So I want to actually switch over and let's do a little bit of a quick, demos on this piece. What I'm going to do is actually show you a few examples. So here is a Microsoft Forms. So in my Microsoft Forms, this is the example that I talked about. I have a medical form over here, and this is the one that I constantly go and use. And right off the bat, I showed you that this is a computer design. I can also go and switch that over to a mobile design. And there's a lot more functionality available over here in Microsoft Forms. Remember, this is absolutely no code. This doesn't even fall in the realm of low code. This is absolutely no code. And you can go ahead and do a lot with this. Depending on how you've built the forms, you can go ahead and use something called as sections. Sections means is I want this section of the form, like right here, as an example, this section of the form is just to go ahead and provide me, information about you, like who are you, what is your name, so on and so forth. That's a section. Then it also on the bottom, it tells me that, hey, you've got actually 3 different pages. You can go ahead and, help the user kind of prep and plan for how many pages that you have. All of this that I'm showing is out of the box. There is no code required whatsoever. In fact, I didn't even have to flip any switch to turn this on. It is smart enough to know that, oh, he's actually added sections to break it down into different pages. So let me just help the end user say that that's the number of pages that you have. Also, you can go ahead and control how you can, take this example of using the example of how I've got over here is that I can break the sections down into initial information. Then I want some medical information. Then I want to know if you've got any allergies, so on and so forth. You plan how you want to break those sessions. And then you can also go ahead and do some other interesting things. So right here, then you're designing the form, right? When you're designing the form, it is giving you examples saying that, hey, that form you're building, it's going to approximately take about 10 minutes. And it's just an FYI that it gives you. That's why all I have to do is come over here and I go ahead and, say, got it. And that way it's telling me that, just, giving me a heads up that, hey, that may be your plan to build this as a big form. And if it is, cool, but I'm just giving you a heads up that all the number of questions that you added, the branching, the rules and everything, it'll take 10 minutes. And this is awesome. This is an out of the box functionality that it's given. And remember, keeping in mind, this is responsive, which means that you can put it by default in any of the examples that you have, either it is the computer or it is a mobile, it's responsive. And this is one of the ones where you can do anonymous, export it, take the link, share it, and put it publicly. Now, when it comes to the sharing piece, and this is actually a section that I will cover before, but I'll briefly go over this. Sharing it publicly, it comes right here. So right now, I have selected something called anyone can respond. Anyone can respond takes away a few settings. So what does that mean? Now, if I go and now toggle back to only people in my organization, well, now it'll give me the functionality, which I don't know what happened. Let's see. Let's go and go back and we'll see. I am missing my settings here. I'll have to come back and take a look at it. What it basically does is it'll help me record who is the one who is actually setting. I can capture, if anybody wants to go ahead and actually is submitting the form internally, I know who that person is. There's an important piece over there. I can turn on the anonymous feature for internal as well. So that means is that even if you want to go ahead and just share it with a group of people, I just know that I want to share it with, say, the legal department, but I don't want to know who from the legal department filled whatever it is. I just want to know, did everybody fill it up? And you can turn on anonymous internally as well. What that means is that it's not going to capture an email address, or technically it is called as the UPN address, the ones that was used for authentication. It won't capture any of that. So you can actually use anonymous both from a public facing standpoint and from an internal standpoint. And then this is basically what it is. The responses are captured and how many people filled in, so on and so forth. This is basically an example of the responsive piece. Now, I had an example ready for the portals one, but in this case, since we already have it, we just got out of that session, I won't spend too much time on that, but at least show you a little bit of what the portal is. So here's the example of the public facing portal apps built in Powerapps, which is the demo that we saw. And here's just a rough idea of what it is. You've got the ability to actually put a menu on the top. You've got the functionality to do some designing. So even though this is called as portal apps, it is a very robust website. And just here's an example of all that is there. You can come in, you can do designing of the website, again, from a very UI perspective. You can do some coding. We just saw an example of that. But you can also do a lot of drag and drop. It's very simple. And on the back end, this is what the functionality looks like. You can go ahead and actually see your sites. You can go ahead and do some designing from the basic forms, all of this. In fact, this section over here tends to look a lot like the model-driven apps as well, just to make it a little bit more easier for you to understand. So that's the example. I just wanted to quickly cover a little bit about the Microsoft Forms and the Power Apps portal side. Now, since we are here, I want to briefly cover a little bit about this new functionality, which is there for Microsoft Lists. So what that means is that now in Microsoft Lists, you've got the functionality to go ahead and grab ability to do public-facing filling of lists. It's called as right now. It's called as an MSA preview. So let me just end my slideshow and I'll actually go grab that link so you can see it. In fact, I'll paste it in the chat so you can even go ahead and just do a little testing of it. So I'll put that in here, paste that in. This is actually a demo of the MSA Microsoft Lists. In fact, what it does is that's something you can play with it right now as well. It's 100% free right there. I went ahead and grabbed. Oh, it's the not authentication. So I'm going to say maybe in mine it's actually pulling it in. Oh yeah, that's right. It's got a whole bunch of stuff which is coming in like that. It's not just the link. It's all that text and everything in it. Let's try that. It's basically not. If you actually click on the link, you may be able to get it working. What it does is it provides you a nice line-by-line item of a Microsoft list. It's the exact same thing which looks like a list, but there as end users, you are able to go ahead and just put in your information, and it really doesn't asks you any authentication. It just gives you the functionality to go ahead and submit items anonymously or as a public-facing one. And that's basically it. You can come over here. You can still use that link to go ahead and sign in to the Microsoft Lists preview. Now, keep in mind, when you log into the Microsoft Lists preview, it doesn't show you all the lists that you have internally on your list. That looks completely different. This is currently in previews. It only shows you your stuff. And once you get in, that's it. You go and build that. So let me do one attempt to go and log in, see if that works. If it doesn't, let me see. This one is, yeah, let me switch over to my tenant. One more time. Go in here, Microsoft Lists, we'll list MSA. And so this is right now in the lists.live.com. That's the URL. And this is actually the one that I have built. That link over here, when people log in, you can go ahead and click on an add new item, and you can just submit all of these items line by line. That's it. It's not a, awesome form like Microsoft Forms or Powerapps. It's just a place where you put in some line-by-line access, and that's basically it. It's called lists.live.com. It's in preview. You can go actually to that website and subscribe, and do a trial right now and just play around with it. All the functionality is exactly like your Microsoft lists, but it gives you the flexibility to both share and get information at a public level. So since it was a new feature, it's in preview. It just came out last week. I thought I'll, drop that little icing on the cake over here. Cool. And let's just go ahead and continue on that. So we went ahead and talked about it from the public-facing standpoint. We talked about the anonymous, the responsive design, data sources. I did talk about that, Dataverse, export to Excel spreadsheet, and the different licensing type. The other things that in the public-facing form, I also showed you some examples of the portal. So here's another example of the portal that I've shown you, a place where you can go ahead and fill the form. You can do a lot of designing as well, how you can go ahead and add them, the maps and the functionality. And then this is kind of the place I wanted to talk. I've already mentioned that in the previous session, that there was actually a report, and this report was even put in by the Wired magazine. Some of you might know the Wired magazine is pretty popular, but they had talked about how 38 million records was lost because of a Power Portal. What happened at that time was this was not a glitch in the system whatsoever. This was because something had gone wrong with how people had set up the Power Portal. In fact, that right now, that mistake, whatever the end users, can't even happen, because by default, there's so much more user level and row level security put in that by default, it can't be shared at all. So if people were not savvy enough to even notice these settings things, by default, you just cannot lose data this way. And I every time when I'm doing workshops on these things, that question somebody will always ask me, what happened if I went ahead and put all this data, my data got lost? Wired magazine went back in August of this year. I said, well, okay, valid point. Again, not a glitch in the system. It was an end user, how they had set it up. But now Power Platform, the product team, have taken a step further, where if for whatever reason people have forgotten to even check that, by default, it just cannot happen. And I'll at the end, I'll post that link in the chat over here. So it's an important thing that I wanted to call out for those reasons. All right, so now we're going to switch gears a little bit. We're going to go ahead and look at it from an internal side. And sure, I'll talk a little bit. There are some things which we can make it public facing as well. We'll talk a little bit about that. But mostly this is going to be internal, where internal I can do a one-time add only. Well, what does that mean? Where an example actually already talked about is Microsoft Forms. I can go ahead and turn on that, hey, this is the form made for internal, but I only want one set of people to go ahead and turn that. So what internal form gives me the functionalities, I want to record the responses. So what that means is not just I want to record, but I also want to record the responses. Means that I want to know who is filling this out, how much time did it take for them to fill this out, and then when it was filled out. All of those things can be done. So out of the box functionality is in Microsoft Forms, and I'll show you a demo. We'll go back and take a look at it again. But then you can go ahead and do this for Powerapps as well. And I'm quickly going to show you this formula. If you want, feel free to take a screenshot of it. But if you go to your Powerapps and you go ahead and create a list, in that list, as long as you are gathering the user's email address, you can go ahead and use this functionality where when people are coming in to fill out that Microsoft Forms, it will check to see, hey, I just want a count of rows. Go ahead and get me a count of rows of that of whatever it is that data source, which is a list or a Dataverse table or a SQL table, whatever it is. Go ahead and get me that data source. Get the email addresses, and that's an important thing. You need to at least capture something very unique, whether it be the email address or the UPN that is coming in from your M365 Azure AD, or you yourself have some kind of unique identification for the people. Whatever it is, get that and then reference that, preferably email address. Reference that with the login person's email address, and then if the total count is greater than 0, then in that case, actually, total count in that case should be 1. Totally missed that one over here. But if it is greater than 0, which means it will be at least 1. If it is 1, somebody's already filled out a section in that form, which means go ahead and make it in the visible property, go ahead and make it false. And this magic formula is how you go ahead and do that one-time add only. So feel free to take a screenshot of this one over here, right? That's the magic, that how you go ahead and use Powerapps. And again, that data source could be a SharePoint list. It could be Dataverse. It could be a SQL table. this applies to all of them, right? So I'll at least show that piece over here. Now, let's go back to our the Microsoft Forms. And in the Microsoft Forms, let's go back and see if we can grab that information. So here, I'm going to actually go out one more step. And I'm going to go back into my Microsoft Forms. And let's see if we can go ahead and grab that information. So in the sharing piece, actually it's under settings. There we go. In the settings, this is what it is. Anyone can respond. All right, that's the demo that I just showed you. Now, if I go back into, let me pause over here since I'm here. In the anyone can respond, you've still got the options to go ahead. And remember, this is anonymous, so I don't know who it is responding. But even from an anonymous standpoint, I've got the flexibility to say, well, accept the responses. Or once you're done with getting information, you can turn that off. And then if people do try to come and try to fill up a form, put in a message over here, hey, that the submission process is completed or the polls have ended. All of that text, you can go ahead and put that in. You can also go ahead and put in a start and an end date, so you don't have to come in and say I'm going to turn off the accept forms. You can actually go ahead and do that turn off. So anonymous, even with anonymous access, you can go ahead and do a Microsoft Forms thing. That's why, as someone like me, I mean, you all know, Sharon knows that I'm a huge Power Platform fan, but I still go and tell people that if this is a one-time submission, go take a look at Microsoft Forms first, because you can literally build a form in 5 minutes. And I know there's a lot of people who come and say, well, I can build a Microsoft Forms in 45 minutes or 60 minutes. I can build a Microsoft Powerapps in 45 or 60 minutes. I can build a Microsoft Forms in 5. I dare someone to come and build a Powerapps in 5 minutes over there. I know Shane would say yes to that, but I'm like, Shane, you can't do that in 5 minutes. I know you're good. You're not that good, though. Feel free to share this comment with Shane. He's a good friend of mine. So back over here, though, is you can build that Microsoft Forms so fast away. But now let's switch gears and talk about an internal one. So internal one, you can still record the names. But here's the one, though, is that one-time one, you've got this functionality, is one response per person. So see, Microsoft Forms is pretty powerful because out of the box, it went ahead and recorded that, okay, Daniel has turned, or the user has turned on this option where whoever's coming in should be able to only record the form once. And in the back end, there's a lot of magic that happens. Besides the fact that it's keeping track of the user's authentication, it's also keeping track of your DNS settings. It's also keeping track of your IP addresses. So it knows that, hey, this person can come in and is also it's an authentication user, so we know who the person is, but it's also keeping track of somebody who's coming in from this location and so on and so forth. It's actually a really powerful tool from that standpoint over there. All right, cool. So let's actually also take a look at from that Powerapps standpoint. This is actually a general medical form, and if you notice this one right here, this was the form that I had done to build it from Microsoft Forms. And over here, I took that same Microsoft Forms and I replicated that into Powerapps. In fact, actually, I did a video on this, is that you can, if you've come to a point that, hey, this Microsoft Form is great, but I now have a need for people to go back and do this. And a great example in that, I think it was a session I did, it wasn't a video, where how I can go ahead and make this app for a patient who comes into the clinic will be able to fill this form out. And then if you fall under another security group of nurses, doctors, then they will be the one to see this button. And then in that button, they can go ahead and see all this information. So here's an example where you can go ahead and see the exact same forms. And if you filled all of this information, then the next button comes up. Again, same type of functionality which you can build in Microsoft Forms. I am able to replicate a good amount of it in Powerapps as well, putting a lot of work into it. Keep that in mind. And for a very specific need, that this will be, for ad and also for viewing purposes. So, not to steal any thunder away from Powerapps. Powerapps is a really powerful tool, but just keep in mind what is the scenario. And for this particular scenario, it is where I need to see the medical information after the patient has actually submitted the first entry new patient form. All of this can be done now. There's a lot of other jazz that goes on over here, but did you notice something? And this is another tip I'm going to share with you. You don't see the Microsoft Powerapps on the top. Do you know how that's done? I'll show you on the top in the URL. And if you already know this, this is awesome, but I do this a lot. See on the top, this is what we're normally seeing over here. But now, if I want to share this internally with people and I don't want to tell them it's Powerapps, this is what you put in on the after the URL. You put in an ampersand and you say hide nav bar equals true. And I'll put that in the chat so you actually see that. This is the additional one put in over here, hide nav bar into it too. Sharon says, Shane, challenge accepted in 5 minutes. If Shane's on this call, Shane, can you build a Powerapps in 5 minutes? I know what he's going to do. He's going to, go ahead and take a template. It'll already have the add, view, and edit forms. And you say, well, I'm done. It's not going to look that good. But
yeah, but I bet he'd do it.
Oh, I know he'll do it. That's Shane, man. You mess with him, he will definitely mess with you. He loves challenges. He loves challenges. That's actually, it's not us who has said it. There's people outside who've actually asked for him and I to challenge together. And someday we'll probably do it. We'll just depend on how that happens.
Actually, Daniel, I've got your attention on the chat. There is a question for you from Fernando. What's the most efficient data source to store images in Power Platform, Dataverse or Azure Blob Storage?
I'll say that efficient one right now from a both use standpoint and just from the end user standpoint is the Dataverse. And I'll actually towards the end I'll even show you from some really hard numbers to actually show how it can handle large capacity and things like that. Now Azure Blob Storage is really powerful because I know from I won't say so much as a capacity, but as a performance standpoint, if you are starting to talk about, say, you're taking some really high images, raw files, I'm in photography, so I know those raw files can sometimes be 50 megs, 75 megs. You've got large file sizes. Then you want to start considering storing it in Azure Blob Storage. In fact, I had a call with one of a maker and a Powerapps maker, huge. Like they have large, tractor trailers and stuff like that. Their images are really big because they take wide-angle shots and all that jazz. They went ahead and said that Daniel, we tried Dataverse with all of that things. Eventually, we just switched back into SQL for the table, which is all the text and units and everything. Azure Blob Storage for the images because that worked for them. On the other side, though, there were other people who say, my images, I work for a landscaping company. I have to go to a client's place. I just go ahead and take images of what their front yard, backyard looks like. These are not big images. These are like, even though they are high resolution shots, they're only 12 megs or 14 megs. I think, no, that for them, Dataverse worked just fine. So it's the content. Keep that in mind. It's not so much as how much data, it's the actual content. You've got some really big files. That's when you want to start looking at it from a blob storage standpoint. But remember, there is some additional work involved over there. You've got to build that relationship, and there's a little bit of jazz. Now, in fact, I think Shane did a video on that now. That was almost 2 years ago or a year and a half ago. He's actually built a good video on how to build the tables, then make that relationship some blob storage. So go check out his channel on that one over there. So hopefully this answers that.
Yeah, I think Sancho made a fair point in response to it as well, that not everybody has the blob access rights. Yeah, so sometimes you may find it's easier for internal development to use Dataverse. So yeah, you're correct. It's horses for courses, right?
I always say it's definitely to each their own, but you just got to be careful what all that you're work that you're putting in over there.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, thank you. So we went ahead and looked at it from this standpoint, and we looked at it, again using the out-of-the-box functionality for, for Microsoft Forms. Even internally in Microsoft Forms, you can make it a public-facing type of things where I share it with a group of people, but I don't want to know who submitted it. I just wanted to know what was the content. And then here was the example that you can do it for internally as well using Powerapps. Just kind of keep that in mind as far as what's the formula that you want to use over here. All right, so now let's go ahead and actually jump in and talk about it from the view and edit. So what does view and edit mean? Again, it's a system that falls internally because internally I want with any of these data sources from team standpoint or Powerapps standpoint or from Sharepoint standpoint, this will be internally where I can go ahead and put in the data, but I want to go back and also see it, edit it, and things like that. And there's a couple of things that you want to be mindful of. So I want to break that down specifically from different things. So I've got permissions. I also put AI automation right up front because that's a big one right now. but we'll go from this angle: permissions, design, and AI automation. Well, do you want permissions? Specifically, do you want role level permissions? First, because I want to break that down from a SharePoint's perspective. We'll also go and look at it from Powerapps and Powerapps in Teams. We'll look at that as well. Now, SharePoint has a built-in functionality to go ahead and turn on role level for permissions over there. What that means is that when you go to SharePoint, you go to its advanced settings, you can actually turn on saying that, hey, the users who fill that in, they should only be able to see their data and they should only be able to edit their data. A little tip on that is that by default, the SharePoint admins, who are the admins of that site, they will always see everything. And I say that is because I've been on those 30-minute calls that I help people with. They were like, Daniel, I saw your video, and I actually have 2 videos on this topic on my YouTube channel. They said, I walked through the settings, it's not working for me. I didn't even have to spend any more time on that. I said, oh, because you're a SharePoint admin. I was like, which I did mention in that video. But the person honestly, in their defense, just did not know what level of access they had. But I said, yeah, let's go into the root side of that. Maybe they had subsites. Go to the root side over there on the top right. Click on settings, advanced settings, and they realize, oh, I have full access to this site. It's like, yep, and that's exactly why these permissions didn't apply for you. So keep in mind sometimes that I'll just digress a little bit from that. Is that when you're doing these type of testing, specifically permissions testings, have your account always have a test account. And many companies already do that. I know a lot of engineers and makers, they have something called as a privileged account or their high-level access account, and then they have a regular account, which is their regular account. The high-level access always has the highest level of access. So that's what they use to go and make the forms and everything. The regular account is what's got regular access, and that's a good one for testing. If you have the scenario, awesome. If you don't, at least come up with a test account or a few test accounts to test the scenarios, permissions being a big one over there. All right, so from a design standpoint, when you're going ahead and actually building it, you've got the functionality for internally. You can use the Microsoft Forms for that as well. But this is where I go ahead and use Powerapps a lot. Now, when we talk about design, I cannot help but talk about the 3 different versions of Powerapps and Canvas Studio that are actually currently available right now. And this usually, for some reason, it does shock a lot of people. I said, yeah, there's actually 3 different versions. And if you always go to Powerapps, you go to the advanced settings and you take a look at the app versions over there and specifically the Canvas versions, you will always notice is that the most advanced or the most Canvas Studio that has the most features and functionalities are always this Canvas Studio in Teams. There is where all the new functions comes out. There is where all the new controls come out, and any designs or anything always comes in the Teams first, which we always know why, because Teams is the center of attention for a lot of reasons. Putting it over there just makes sense. Now, second to that, it'll always be in the Powerapps Canvas Studio. This one over here, when you go and make standalone calls, this is where you will have the second design functionality, which means that all those new features you see in Teams Canvas Studio, after it's over there, then it comes into the Powerapps piece over here. But there's a workaround for that. In fact, I've done a video on that too, is how you can go ahead and pull the infamous control, which is in Teams, which everybody wants. They've wanted it for a while. The product team heard about it. They dropped it in Microsoft Teams, and that is the calendar control. I know there's a lot of people on this call right now who's like, yep, that's the one. They're all nodding. I know. I bet you Sharon is nodding right now too. It's like that one, which was the big one, they dropped it in the calendar control, or the date picker one. They dropped that into Teams. But you can actually go into Teams, open the Canvas Studio, copy that, do a Control-C, drop it into the Powerapps standalone one, and it just works. I've actually done a video because there's a few other controls which are much more newer in the Teams Canvas Studio. In fact, they have a lot more properties in the advanced sections. When you bring them over into your standalone, it just works. So from that design standpoint, I wanted to call that out, is that depending on how you're designing it, if you want to build a full standalone app, go ahead and do that in Powerapps. And if you see some nice things in Teams, you can go and grab that as well. Finally, the SharePoint, and I briefly touched that a little before, is you've got the functionality to build what's called as a customized form. The customized form is a lightweight version of Powerapps Canvas apps. Now, what lightweight version means is that couple of things. You cannot go ahead and save that as you do a save as. You can't go in and grab that MSAPP file or the zipped file. You can't do that. That SharePoint list is actually gone ahead and the customized Power Form is always tied to that SharePoint. In fact, even if you go in, when you're clicking on it, you watch the URLs. The URLs will actually show SharePoint, then it switches over to the Canvas Studio, and then it switches back again directly into the SharePoint again. That's why it's tied directly to the SharePoint. What that means is that when you've gone ahead and built a customized form, you won't find that app in your default environment. It doesn't work that way. It's always tied to that. In fact, right now over here, there was I don't know if you caught that, but in Ignite, they made an announcement is that it's specifically with Microsoft lists, all right, the Microsoft list over there. If in your Microsoft lists, with those lists that you have, if you build Powerapps or if you build Power Automate, what are the apps and the flows over there? When you're doing migrations inside Microsoft lists with the export and everything, these apps and flows should also migrate along with it. That got me excited. In fact, it was a very simple blurb that went out over there that got me excited. In fact, there's in Reza and me in our R&D show, we had mentioned that it was the post-Ignite session. If you go watch that, you will actually see us mentioning about that. We put some links over there as well. Now, for us SharePoint people on this call, we were like, oh, this is right back to what it was before. Because remember, when we back in the InfoPad Designer days and the SharePoint Designer days, when you had a SharePoint list and you had InfoPad Designer forms attached to it and you had a SharePoint Designer, when you went ahead and exported that STP file, and there's the people on this call I know who know what STP file is. STP was the export of a SharePoint list. When you exported that, it actually had the form with it and it had the workflows with it as well. And when you imported that into another SharePoint site or another list, it would bring all of it over. I'm really, really hoping and excited that will happen with the SharePoint list as well over there. All right, so finally, the last piece that I want to talk about that is from the AI version as well. Now, when you want to add a lot of AI piece could be anything to do with the 3D models or the mixed reality pieces. You want to go ahead and have the form editor. You want to go ahead and have other of the AI features, and there's a bunch of them. Those do not come inside the SharePoint one, or they don't come inside the Teams. They come on the standalone one. So when you're planning on building these view and edit type of functionalities, you want to figure out those. What are your permissions? What is the design criteria? Any AI needed? Then you plan, okay, this is going to be inside. I don't have a whole bunch of the AI. I don't have too much on the design piece. I'll do that inside Microsoft Teams. But then I'll, otherwise I might have to build that as a standalone one. Now, since we are here, there's two items that I do want to call out immediately. I see some people when they build these forms in SharePoint, you don't want to add a lot of gallery/search inside the SharePoint's customized form. Why? Because you have a Microsoft list right next to it, and Microsoft Lists gives you so much design functionality. Plus, the Microsoft list right on the top of the page has a place for you to go and do a search as well. So don't build customized forms with a lot of galleries to go ahead and do filtering and all that jazz. Now, I do know that there are examples where based on which item that you've set in the SharePoint list, there's some filtering that happens inside the SharePoint, inside the customized form. And I've seen those examples. Just keep in mind that as long as you're not having any delegation problems, your formulas are good, that is also still doable. But don't put large galleries directly inside the SharePoint list because you already have the list right there to go and do that. So that's one thing I want to call out. Second thing I want to call out is that there's this misunderstanding, which I see from some people, is that if you go ahead and build a Canvas app inside Microsoft Teams, then by default is responsive. That is not correct. What happens is that many people have actually played with the templates that they've got with the Microsoft Teams, and those templates were actually built as a responsive fashion. In fact, you will actually go and see the container control outside. In most of these Microsoft Teams templates, you will see that they've used a lot of those containers over there, which makes it responsive, but that's because it was designed that way. So if you build Powerapps inside the Teams, it doesn't automatically become responsive. You still have to build it that way. So those two things I wanted to call out over there. So what I'll do is I'll actually show you an example I have in my SharePoint list. Actually, I already showed you that example. I think it's the one right here. Yeah, this one. It is that one. The example that was about the medical form over here. Now, in the medical form, But we've got a few minutes. We can actually go take a look at it. This is the form. We'll go and open that into the standalone Powerapps Studio. So we're loading into the Powerapps Studio. If you just remember from the slide deck that I just talked about, there's a few things that, the new features, all of them usually come out in Microsoft Teams, but you've got the functionality to go ahead and copy it into that. So here, while this is loading, this was the actual form that I had built in Microsoft Forms. And you can see that I actually put some work into this. If I scroll down, you will see that there is, I had put it as sections. I intentionally broke it down into a different section. So there was the initial information, then there was the, existing medical information, anything about, recreational drugs and so on and so forth. All of that, I broke it down into different sections piece over here. In the Powerapps, I did take some of that idea and I was able to go ahead and break that down into different screens. So in Microsoft Forms, there were sections. Over here, I broke that down into different screens. What I did do is I used a lot of my forms directly over here. And another tidbit I'll throw out is that when I build forms, I only use the edit form. I'm not a heavy user or any user of the display form. I always use the edit form. Why I use the edit form? Because I've got the option for the default mode to go ahead and make it just view, and it behaves the same way. But time and again, people have seen the display form and they've always come back to me and said, hey, I like the form. Can I just click on a button and start editing over there? That's why I use a lot of these edit forms. I've gone through that a bunch of times. And see this, I use the same design as I had in Microsoft Forms, as using the functionality to Microsoft Forms and sections, gave me a different page type effect. Well, over here, I did the exact same thing, went ahead and built a different screen type effect, just making it very similar to Microsoft Forms. So it is doable. Remember, there is no one-click button to do that migration from Microsoft Forms to Powerapps, Canvas apps. You've got to build it yourself. However, it is very doable from that perspective on that, all right? And then this is what I was talking about. When you want to come ahead and have these type of features, AI Builder, all of these mixed reality builder, this is not available, or some of it is not even usable inside the Microsoft Teams Powerapps or inside the SharePoint's customized form. That's when you will have to come over here into the Powerapps Canvas Studio and actually build it from that perspective. Cool, let's keep moving on. They're doing also good on time, so we'll go back here. Should have changed the setting. All right, so from a desktop and a mobile device perspective, again, this is for the internal piece. Internal piece, which means that somebody is authenticating. It's not, it's not the public-facing one. You've got a few options. First of all, in Powerapps itself, the responsive design is constantly improving. Back in the day, now I have been using Powerapps now back from the previews days to about 5 years now. I was one of the early adopters of it. There was no discussion of responsive at that time. In fact, I personally started seeing responsiveness coming in only 3 years ago. And then in the last 2 years, when they really started bumping up on the responsiveness, the big one for me was the ability to go ahead and put in inside the responsiveness container. If you drop an edit form in there, that edit form by default becomes responsive. To me, that was huge, because I didn't have to do anything to that form. It automatically becomes responsive. So that's why I've always been a big fan of that edit form anyway. This one just took my likeness towards it at the next level. However, everything else, you still have to play with the design width, design height, X and the Y coordinates. You've got to do a lot of that. I've got videos on that. In fact, Reza just released one last week on how to take existing apps and go ahead and make it responsive. Again, using that same type of functionality. So it's definitely there. Now, I always tell people is opt for Canvas app first. Well, what does that mean? What that means is that if you are building, say, I'll take an example, a SharePoint list, all right? They say that we've got a SharePoint list, we want to build a customized form for that. Even then, I will still go ahead and build it as a Canvas app. And SharePoint has the functionality, a widget to go ahead and embed that as a Powerapps form or an app. So end users will still not think that, oh, this is not an app, this is still a form. I have to go to a SharePoint, I have to click on this link, and there's my form. But too many times I've actually had the scenarios where people have come and say, hey, that's a great form, but I have a whole crew who's traveling a lot. Can they just open that up on their Powerapps, on their tablets? And after that, you say, I got you. It's already an app, and then you just go ahead and give them access to that app as well, and they just start working. So my personal approach has always been is opt for the Canvas app first. unless they actually know that, hey, no, these people are 100% desktop people. They actually are not traveling. They go ahead and, are in a company or other desktop. Well, then, customized forms can be that. But I always opt for the Canvas app first. And then I talked about the option of going ahead and, the 3 different versions of Canvas Studio. Again, the key ones was Teams was the one that always has new releases over there. Comes to the Powerapps standalone, and then sometimes in SharePoint over there. Embedding the form in SharePoint is an example that I just talked about. It goes ahead and gives you the functionality to actually embed that. I do want to add something on that, is that there is a widget already available, or a web part that's already available in SharePoint to add a customized form. What I've heard complaints from some people is that it's not a very fluid design, where it doesn't automatically fill up the entire space. You can do some coding level on that as well. And April Dunham has actually done a video on that. She saw somebody else had done a great example, but she deep dives into how to do it. So go to her YouTube channel. She actually walks you through how to build that. If you want to use some code to really fill up all real estate blank spaces, go check her YouTube out over there. All right, so now we'll actually switch up and talk a little bit about volume and capacity. And I'll add a little bit more on to that question which was done, is that how much volume or entries can each form handle? Really important question over there. So we're going to go ahead and actually focus from all different standpoints, from forms, Powerapps, Dataverse, Teams, Dataverse, which is also be Teams, Powerapps, Dataverse, and then from SharePoint. And this is actually a place where I get asked the most questions about capacity, planning, and so on and so forth. So from all of these years of these questions that I've had, I'm actually going to present that right away here, and we might have a few more questions over there. So let's talk about forms first. Forms can now, as of right now it can handle, like right now, if you went and used it right now, it can handle 50,000 responses. However, there was just a message that went out. If you go to your own message center, M365 admin message center, you should see this alert that has come out, is that this is going to increase to 5 million. In my tenant is on the East Coast of US. It's going to come out around April time. It'll become generally available around April time. It is known that most of these releases come out, from further East Coast, further east. In the globe side, and then it starts coming out to us. That's usually what I've seen. So you all may actually get it much earlier than I will. But the key thing over here is that if you set up a tenant target release, then you might get it by March. But what it is saying is that when you go ahead and in your Microsoft form, you go and take a look at all the responses over there, you will still only see the limit of 50,000. But if you want to see all 5 million of them, you have to export that as an Excel spreadsheet. So that's the update that you've given right now, is that this is going to get bumped up to 5 million using Microsoft Forms. And that's huge. That's a big jump, which means that there were users out there for Microsoft Forms that were using it at this scale level. And that's why there was a need to go ahead and bump up, which is another reassurance that Microsoft Forms is an amazing tool for public/anonymous access type of forms over there. Let's switch gears and talk about it from a Powerapps standpoint. Now, Powerapps is a very important, very interesting thing to talk about, because Powerapps, the shell of the Canvas Studio, really has no dependencies or any problems as far as how much data or how much things. Granted, I know some of you are already thinking, it's like, well, Daniel, I've actually seen there's actually a Microsoft article saying that when you're building a Canvas app, you kind of don't want to go over 500 controls. Yeah, that's from a design standpoint, and granted that the app might take a longer time to load, but now using components, that will shrink a lot. The total number shrinks, but this is pure volume and capacity from the data standpoint, and Powerapps doesn't control that. What controls it is actually the connector. That's what controls the main thing, is what connector are you using and how those connectors can actually handle it. So what I want to do is actually look at it from 2 different standpoints. One is from the Dataverse standpoint, and let's also look at it from the SharePoint standpoint. So I'm going to actually get out of this. Let me go grab some links over here, and I want to show you, because some of the math over there gets a little confusing. So we'll actually take a look at it from both standpoints. So first thing we'll do is let's look at it from the Dataverse standpoint. All right, we're going to actually go in and dive in and look at this from the connector standpoint. And I want to show you details, like hardcore details. So let me actually bump up this size a little bit. So as we go down, here is what I want you to pay attention to. Two things: the throttling limit. So how much data can it handle? Not so much as how much it's saving, but how it's calling that data. So API calls basically where how it is the application's programming interface. That's what API stands for. Is how is your front end app connecting to the backend data? That API call is what it is talking about. Now, before we look at the throttling, I want you to look at this statement. Okay, so this is not a shareable connection, which means if a Power App is shared with another user will be prompted to create a new connectivity. Basically, what it's trying to say is that all of these throttlings are based at a per user level. So it's not like one app and then one app. If there are 10 users, all the 10 users together consume these things. No, it's at a per user level. So the API calls per connection, per user's connection, is 6,000 calls for every 300 seconds. Well, that 300 seconds is basically coming up to around it is exactly coming up to 5 minutes. So if you go ahead and break that 5 minutes, you bring it down to 1 second, 1 minute, it's basically 1,200 calls per minute. And there's a reason I broke that down into 1 minute, because on the SharePoint's document side, they've gone ahead and put that as only 60 seconds. Let's go and take a look at that one as well. We'll come in. We'll look at it from this perspective. Okay, we are into SharePoint, SharePoint's connections. SharePoint has a bunch of things over here, but we're going to scroll down and actually just focus on these things. Right here. API calls per connection. 600 calls every 60 seconds, which is 600 calls per minute. This thing, which is 6,000, was actually 1,200 calls per minute. And this is a very important piece for you to be aware of, because we know a lot of people come to me about the SharePoint is technically free. I've already paid for M365, business license or enterprise license, so I can go and use that. But I take them over here and I show it to them is that it is free. But the fact that you're investing in using Dataverse, here is tangible information of how Dataverse will perform a little better, in fact, twice as better than SharePoint. I've got numbers to prove it. Remember, every 60 seconds or every 1 minute, it will make 1,200 calls. This one, every 60 seconds, makes 600 calls. So I've got numbers to prove that Dataverse, from a capacity and a volume standpoint, will work a little better than SharePoint because of these things. So something to keep in mind, and I always go ahead and show, and I'll put these links in the chat, or you can just go ahead and bing them. This is a very important piece for you to understand from that perspective. And so let's go back, and then other things about the connect. Oops, we went way too outside over there. Let me go back. Back to our the capacity piece. The important things that I want you to know also is not so much as the volume, but also not just the dependency on the connectors. It's also the dependency on the capacity. So a lot of people, and if you don't already know this, when you go ahead and build a form or a chatbot or an app in Teams, it automatically goes ahead and creates an environment for you. Environment is how the different sections are broken down. Basically, just compartmentalizing where your apps and flows are. It's from a Power Platform side, breaking it down into environments. I tell the SharePoint people, think of environments as different sites. In each site, you can go and build multiple lists and multiple document libraries. Environment is similar to a site. In an environment, you can go and build multiple apps, multiple Dataverse tables, multiple flows. That 2 gig is the limit for that. And I've been asked by a lot of people, I said, hey, can I go ahead and put in a ticket or do something to bump up that 2 gigs? And no, you cannot do anything. In fact, it's not 2 gigs that you're given, it's 1.25 gigs, because when you go and create that app or go ahead and when an environment is created, it'll already consume 250 megs for just the configuration of everything, what we call as the plumbing work, going ahead and setting up all the connections. There are other tables that it sets up in there to go ahead and record all the logs and all the flows and everything. So 250 meg is already consumed. So technically you're only given 1.75 gigs, but that 1.75 gigs can handle up to 1 million rows of data. So you've got a lot to work with. Just plan ahead that this is how much capacity I have from a Teams Dataverse perspective. And then the connector limit is the exact same that I showed you. If when you're using Dataverse, you've got solid API capacity for the users, 1,200 calls per minute, which is pretty powerful from that side. Now, in SharePoint, yes, the connector capacity is definitely less than Dataverse, but as far as volume goes, you've got a lot in SharePoint. This has actually been one of the big reasons why people use this for documents, to store information over there. Because I'll give you an example of me. My tenant, it's a multi-license tenant, so I've got 4 people with E3, and I've got 1 for E5. So that's just 5 people. But by default, I've already been given over a terabyte of data, and I can go ahead and allocate the terabyte for so many other people over here. And a lot of people go ahead and build apps with Excel as their backend database, and they store Excel in their OneDrive. Well, OneDrive will give you 1 terabyte of information, depending on how many users you have. It bumps you up to 5 terabytes. And for those really large companies, they can call in Microsoft and on request bump that up to 25 terabytes. That is a lot more over here. So I want to give SharePoint a fighting chance too. Is that yes, the connector API call, when it comes to Dataverse, twice as fast or twice as much, but SharePoint, it's giving you a lot more volume. So sometimes people have to just make that compromise that I don't have the money to do Dataverse, so I'm going to compromise a little bit on that, capacity of API calls, but I'm getting a ton of volume from the data store standpoint. So that's something that I want to kind of call out over here, because if it's not so much as the storage, but it's the capacity. And then finally, I want to just end with one piece, is just the little discussion between these two, is that in Teams, you've got 2 gigs. Well, if you went with Powerapps, if you invested in that per user license, per user license, which by the way, you know that the price dropped down to half not too long ago, by default, you are already given 10 gigs of capacity. And then when you've already bought this license over here, you're also going ahead and given, you can use standard connectors, and you can go and use the premium connectors. That's all you can do. So it's something to think about when you're saving money, when you're doing everything in Teams. Granted, I get it, you want to save money, but you're compromising on the data storage location. However, when you go and invest a little bit more money, you're getting a lot more over there. So in this case, remember, Powerapps standalone, when you're using the Powerapps user, automatically you're given 10 gigs of capacity. While over here, if you stick in Teams, 2 gigs, there is nothing you can do to increase that. They will point you put in a ticket, they will point you, say, oh, you can, just in one click, you can go ahead and bump that up, and it'll switch over as a standalone. Your Dataverse will automatically switch over to the Powerapps side over there, and there's nothing you have to do, but your billing will increase on that. So kind of plan that accordingly over there. Cool. So these were the last things actually I wanted to talk about. Just to do as a quick recap, we were able to go ahead and cover a ton of things about Microsoft Forms. I mean, the forms in general. We broke it down into different categories, right? We went ahead and said, from a public standpoint, there were 2 big competitors for that. There was the Microsoft Forms, and then there was the Powerapps portal apps over there, keeping in mind also where the data is going to be stored. Internally, you had a bunch of options. Oh, by the way, in the public-facing forms, I also showed you the list MSA preview over there, which is pretty awesome. Go ahead and play around with that because it's in preview. It's free right now. Play around with it. Then we looked at it from the internal standpoint. Internal standpoint, you had quite a few competitors, and internal means internal in your company. You have quite a few competitors over there. But again, it depends on what you're trying to do. If you want to focus a lot more on the UI and the UX experience, user interface, user experience, standalone apps might be the best one. Next level up from the UI would be in Microsoft Teams because you've got that functionality. And then if you just want a simple one, even internally, go ahead and use it as a Microsoft Forms because it's that one-time submit over there. And then I shared some advices again on the volume and the capacity. We broke it down into all the 4 different categories over there, whether it's just the Microsoft Forms. Remember, they're going to bump that up to 5 million, from 50,000 to 5 million. And then you've got other things to figure out. If you're going to use Microsoft Forms, the Dataverse, but with Teams, then you've got 2 gigs capacity limit. Powerapps, you've got no capacity. You've got 10 gigs over there. But then we talked about that differences of you want to use Powerapps with Dataverse as against SharePoint for your forms. then there's a huge difference as far as capacity and the and the volumes. There's things that work in the best interest of you when you use the SharePoint. There's things that work in the best interest of using Dataverse. You have to make that final decision over there. So, any questions that have come in?
Not questions, Daniel, and we're a little over time. So
Okay.
there's a reason why you had the longest session of the day. I could literally listen to you all day. But and yes, I want the coffee brand that Daniel's drinking too.